everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who have their sun, rising sign, or both in Scorpio, and how the Saturn transit of Saturn going into Aquarius is going to affect you. Now, Aquarius is a fellow fixed sign, so it squares off to Scorpio and therefore is one of the angular houses, this one being the fourth house of home and family, and your past, your childhood, your parents, especially your mother. And so this is more of a personal type of transit because it's opposing the house of career, which is you in the world. Now, this can be a time with Saturn where you feel a greater sense of duty, a greater sense of obligation in something involving the home, in something involving parents. Some of these explanations that I've been getting online, I haven't really been resonating with. But I will say, because one of the things that they're talking about is psychological situations. And, we can look at this because the fourth house is a water house. And so it's going to be a transit where Saturn is going to demand of you that you do something to kind of stabilize your emotional self as it connects to the past, as it connects to your relationship with your parents. I guess we could say that's psychological, but I would argue that Pluto going through this house is much more on that level. To me, Saturn is about demanding of you certain responsibility, for you to take responsibility. And yes, you could say that getting therapy is taking responsibility for healing your past. For sure. So I don't want to just say like, oh yeah, what they say is completely false because, I feel like it has a lot of merit. However, the reason that I want to differentiate between Pluto and Saturn is because I think that Saturn is more trying to strip away things that don't make sense anymore. And so an example of this would be setting boundaries with parents. And that can be because you are dealing with how the past has affected you now. Because Saturn is about karma. So this, I didn't see this mentioned, but I mean, I think it was kind of intimated about ancestral karma. So looking at the family tree, let's say that you notice, let's say you're in your 30s and you notice that you are drinking too much compared to people that you know. Maybe when you're in your 20s, everybody was partying hardy. And then all of a sudden, people started settling down. They started having careers and kids. And they weren't doing it that much. And you don't have kids, let's say. And you realize that you are doing it more than people that are around in your age group. And you may kind of dismiss it at first, and then it starts to bother you, and you start to look at it. And especially if you're somebody who may have come from a highly dysfunctional family, and maybe you have addiction in your family tree, and you kind of connect those dots and say, maybe there is something here. And so Saturn is like sobering up. This is one of the reasons why when you have your first Saturn return, it can be a very somber experience where it's like, okay, the party's over. I'm 29 or I'm 30, and it's like, I can't, get away with this anymore. I'm thinking about myself, and I want to make it clear that there are some people who will have children when they are 20 or 22. They will get married very young. They will buy a house very young because they just are very good at, the material energy, for lack of a better phrase. They're very good at managing it. They just feel at home and they're very grounded, okay, at a young age. And then there's the rest of us, or I'm talking about myself. Scorpio, you might be one of those ones who are very mature early. That you certainly could be. If you're born close to Sagittarius, if you're born in the close to the cusp with Sag, or you have Sag placements, Mars in Sagittarius, Moon in Gemini or something, that's very kind of youthful, or another fire sign that kind of is a big kid, you may resist growing up. And yeah, I mean, your first Saturn return will bitch slap you. Basically, you will feel this sense of, okay, I have to stop thinking that I can get away with this. And, I have to at least pretend that I'm a grown up. And things around you will kind of tend to support, having a more serious outlook on life. You may, like I said, have peer pressure where you're going to a lot of weddings, and you may hold out on that yourself, but you're in other, your friends' wedding parties, or, just even being in attendance, and you're seeing the march of time, or holding your friends' babies or something like that, and you feel this sense of okay, I'm different than them. And you look and you see what has been the truth. And it's almost like that's another thing too, where Saturn can be the unvarnished truth. And that can be, I don't know, I don't want to say devastating, but it can be very sobering to note, to connect those dots and see how something has been kind of a curse in the family, if you will, like I said, addiction, or some sort of emotional imbalance, or if there has been a lot of divorces, or just disharmony, inharmonious relationships between romantic partners. Just all kinds of different things that have seemed to keep, have kept going, and vowing that it's the buck stops here. You might say that, especially if you have been thinking, maybe I do want kids after all. And this is another thing too, because the fourth house is, maybe starting a family. The fifth house can be conceiving children, but I would say that the fourth house can be a time of actually making that decision that you do want children, because it's like you're taking on the responsibility of this. Now, here's the other thing. Since as I am recording this, we have Saturn in the third house, and it's only, Saturn is going to go briefly into the fourth house, but then it's going to retrograde at 1 degree of Aquarius and go back into that third house. And I will give you the exact dates for all of that in a minute, but I just wanted to state that the third house is like brothers and sisters, and also like extended family members, aunts and uncles, cousins, things like that. And who knows, if you have a sibling who is not doing so well, maybe they have an addiction and you're going to be taking in their children. So you feel this sense of obligation to a sibling because you're family, and you assume responsibility for their children. So your household, which is the fourth house, is kind of like influenced with a sense of duty with your siblings. And another thing that can happen is you may decide to buy a home, And so that might be your first home. And so maybe you've gone through your own, maybe Saturn for you is in Capricorn or Sagittarius. So maybe you're in your around 30 or 35, and you're or maybe in Scorpio, your natal Saturn, and you've gone through your first Saturn return, and now you're ready to buy a house and you're taking on that responsibility. So it's not, I don't know, because I've read so many different things. When you're reading about one particular situation, like a transit of Saturn in the fourth house, you can be rest assured that if you read enough material, you may see contradictory types of information, and or just like different types of information. I actually think that I remember reading one time something about it being difficult to move when Saturn is in your fourth house. And that could be because you have a sense of responsibility that deals with, the home that you presently have. Or, some other thing, like if you're taking care of a parent, for instance, and that's what that means for you, then you can't deal with also, showcasing your house. So, something may block, because Saturn can be like an obstacle or delay. There you go. That's a good word. You from being able to accomplish something that has to do with your home. So I would have expected to see that everywhere, but I didn't. So, if that is something that was in the back of your mind, just understand that this too shall pass. There may be something structural in your house that you have to take care of. And this may be, they were also saying something about, the home and remodeling. Again, I mean, I could see Pluto in the fourth or Mars in the fourth, definitely being about something along those lines. With Pluto, it'd probably be a gut rehab. With Mars, it might be an addition, or just, something that you're doing construction-wise in general, and maybe just something briefly, because Mars doesn't have that long of a transit. With Saturn, it can be something maybe in addition to the house. I mean, it's really kind of hard, because even Jupiter can be expansion, with the house. But yeah, there is going to be a period of time next year when Saturn and Jupiter will be here, and that might be, creating an addition. But in addition to that, doing something that, like, I don't know anything about building houses, but isn't there something about stabilizing the foundation? I can't think of that, but yeah. So, and even like, roofing and things that kind of keep everything together. Who knows? But what else did I want to say about this? It's a good thing when Saturn is in your fourth house that you are willing to do the work. In other words, because Saturn is about work. Saturn isn't about like sticking your head in the sand, trying to skirt your responsibility, whatever it is. And if you are somebody who has realized that your relationship to a parent, and I would say especially a mother, has been problematic, and maybe you have been too willing to look the other way, or to placate this parent. Saturn is about being a grown-up. Saturn is about having boundaries. We're talking about foundation, but also structure. And when you're dealing with remember, this is a water house. This is ruled by Cancer. So structure with emotions is your own psychology. Again, this is where when they were talking about therapy, I could see it on that level, is like getting your emotions in check and under control, in other words. And B, having your relationships to others in check, where it's not just like anything goes. Saturn is a strict disciplinarian, and sometimes you have to lay down the law with people. But it's important to note, Scorpio, that sometimes the other person is not going to play nice. They're not going to do what you want them to do. So you have to be willing to accept the raw, unvarnished truth about what may occur when you do that. And that in and of itself can be quite an eye-opener. And so it may feel like a sense of loss, because Saturn doesn't like unnecessary things. And sometimes, sad to say, we find out in personal relationships that some relationships simply do not have a clear purpose. They only seem designed to produce pain. And even if you were trying to understand the other person, and if you know that the other person has gone through a difficult time in their childhood, so speaking about the legacy of families that suffer and pass down certain dysfunctional traits, even if you know that, you may realize at some point that you are enabling their bad behavior, and you're trying to be a teacher. Saturn is a teacher, and sometimes the lesson is a harsh one. And Scorpio, it's funny because I always like to separate Scorpios from the other water signs, because I feel that Scorpios are not like Pisces and Cancers. They are their own people, and they have a tendency to do their own thing. And I think part of that is the rulership of Mars, which is so rebellious and, my way or the highway, and Pluto, which is so, what came into my mind is Darth Vader-esque. Well, I added the esque, but yeah. Just that kind of like all pervasive intensity. And so even though you are very emotional and your emotions run very deep, I also think that you're fierce, which means that, and I'm thinking specifically of the Mars energy, and that it's like kind of that you're capable of like saying, to hell with this, if you feel like somebody is really trying to jerk you around. And you're very, in my observation of people who are Scorpios that I have known, they seem very family oriented, like other water signs. However, I could see somebody with Saturn transiting the fourth house who might just say, bye Felicia to to somebody who's very disruptive in their lives, and not be willing to take it just because they happen to just share DNA. You know what I mean? So yeah, and let me talk about dates. So we're gonna see Saturn going into Aquarius on March 21st, and then station retrograde on May 11th. May is a doozy of a month from what I can see because we're going to have a bunch of retrogrades. So I wonder how that's going to play out. This is a weird year because we have a lot of eclipses, and most of them are lunar eclipses, and then we have a lot of retrogrades. So I think there's a lot of closure happening, and this is in the form of the eclipses letting go of things or them kind of going bye-bye. And then on top of that, the experience of having the retrogrades of like revisiting the past. Okay. So when Scorpio, when Saturn goes retrograde, it's going to go back into Capricorn on July 2nd and then go direct on September 29th. So you can see how long that retrograde is. It's going to be from mid-May until late September. Oof, right? Because that's a long time. And then it goes direct at 25 degrees of Capricorn. So it's back in your third house. And then it will, start to gain degrees. And this is really cool. It goes back into Aquarius or back into your fourth house on December 18th of 2020. And by the way, this is right after the solar eclipse in Sag on December 14th, which is going to be in your second house of earned income. So that's nice. And then, but anyway, so you have Saturn in the fourth on December 18th. And then the very next day, you have Jupiter going into Aquarius as well. So they will be in conjunction, an exact conjunction, for a few days, close to the solstice. And then, but they'll be in the same sign. You know what I mean? So that to me is really cool because you have the best of both worlds. You have the luck and the sense of optimism and opportunity of Jupiter in that fourth house. And then you have Saturn being the disciplinarian, which is good because then it's more balanced. You know what I mean? It's not too dour and it's not too excessive. Okay, Scorpio, that's what I have for you. I hope that you received something from this. If you would like me to look at your chart and do a natal chart interpretation, or I have transits that are extended. I'm doing an extended transit reading for this new year. Well, I might even go into February of 2021 since I'm doing 12 months worth of transits. So check me out at rainamoonastrology.com. The link is below. Take care. Bye.